Well, hello. This might be a little German language lesson for you. Gemeinsam stark. This is actually, hi again. My name is Christoph Mücher. I'm director of the Goethe-Institut Boston, which you can see here. And wouldn't it be great to be all together here today to celebrate the latest work by Boston Dance Theatre? Well, Corona is still striking and we are very much apart from each other. And this is actually the subject of Jessie and Boston Dance Theatre's new work. Last year, as a German culture institute, we've been reflecting on 30 years of German reunification, how happy Germans are to be together again, and yet how sad it is, even 30 years afterwards, to be somewhat apart from each other. And then we had to look around society in Germany, in the US, all over the world. And we had a certain feeling that this notion of being apart while we still wish to be together is something very universal. And Corona, obviously, is adding to that. So we took up discussions with Jessie and her team and said, listen, how about doing a tailor-made work on reflecting on these divisions, loneliness, desires of being together again? And when you know Jessie, she immediately took up, and the wonderful dance people have been working here in our beautifully restored, renovated Goethe-Institut in Back Bay, 170 Beacon Street here in Boston. And they managed to do a wonderful piece, Corona restrictions, no dangers involved. And we are so happy to celebrate the premiere of this piece tonight with you guys. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Jessie Jeanne Stinnett. I'm the founder and co-artistic director of Boston Dance Theater. I'm here today with Gabby and Henok. Do you want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, my name is Gabriela Maria Mi Moreno. I am a performer in the work and also Jessie's administrative assistant, and I will be asking Jessie and Henok some questions today.
Hi, I'm Henok Spinola. I'm also a performer with Boston Dance Theater. Gabby, would you like to get started with questions?
Certainly, let's get right to it. So Jessie, could you introduce the BDT team and the people involved with this commission from the Goethe-Institut Boston?
Sure, yeah. So the design team that I'm working with and have been working with quite regularly on a few other projects this year are Jessie Galili, who's our costume designer. She also was the set designer for the work. She has a background in engineering. And also working with Ernesto Galan of Scalped Productions. He's our videographer, so he shot the video and edited it for us. And also then we're working with my brother Grant Stinnett, who is the composer for the work. The performers, including Gabby and Henok, are Olivia, Chris, and Isabel. And for the research portion of the work, the rest of the BDT team was with us. Taimi, who is a core member, and then also our 3 trainees who are with us right now, Claire, Carmen, and Carly.
Can you speak about the context of the commission? Who initiated and what were the initial ideas of the work?
Yeah. So Boston Dance Theater is really fortunate to have had a long-standing relationship with the Goethe-Institut of Boston. We've collaborated on multiple projects now over the last few years. And so this project feels like just yet another step in that relationship. It was originally this work was conceived of as a film, and the Goethe-Institut of Boston switches leadership every couple of years. So this was my first time working on a project with Christoph, who is the new leader here at Goethe in Boston. It was Christoph's idea to center the work around the idea of reunification as a way of sort of comparing events that have happened in Germany and current events in the United States.
So Jessie, how did you choose to work with this prompt from the Goethe-Institut?
Yeah, so I initially started just by researching Germany in 1989 and 1990, sort of trying to wrap my mind around the historical events that led up to the fall of the Berlin Wall. And, at first I was sort of really overwhelmed. I became, as I was researching more and watching interviews and documentaries and reading, I just sort of felt overwhelmed by the weight of that moment in history. And so I found myself sort of shifting away from more sort of broad informational sorts of resources, and I really sought out more sort of like DIY archival media that has been sort of saved and in various different crevices of the internet, searching on YouTube and things like that, because I was interested in connecting with personal stories of people who were alive during that time and who had experienced life on either the east or the west side of the wall. So out of this sort of, really heavy and, complex subject matter, I started by working with the dancers of Boston Dance Theater through a process of reflective writing, sort of trying to find a way to land some of these big ideas, these complex ideas about bringing people who have been divided and have really grown into sort of two separate ways of being, one side being the communist-driven side, the other side really living through capitalism, and then thinking and looking at how those two sides of Germany came together. Anyway, so out of all of that, I was trying to make space for our current situation and find the relevance in it for us. And so we started simply by doing some writing about our experiences of separation during the COVID-19 pandemic, like personal stories to each of the artists. And we started by looking at separation and things we've lost or we have been separated from during this time, and we sort of tried to imagine what coming together again might look like after a change in government that was back last year in 2020. So we were anticipating a shift in government at that time, and also thinking about what the world might look like after the distribution of a COVID vaccine. This period of research through writing and sort of collective sharing of experience through talking was really the springboard for movement exploration, setting up of different scenarios in the studio, all sort of with the intention of harvesting material, ideas, images, inspiration from those sort of initial writing prompts.
Can you talk a bit about the significance of the wall?
Yeah. So originally, riffing off of the Berlin Wall story, we knew that we were interested in having some sort of barrier or boundary present in the space potentially, a barrier or boundary that would open throughout the course of the work. And we landed on the material of plexiglass, A, for its transparency, because of course you can see through it, but B, because we knew that we were going to be working with projection. So that was something that I was really interested in from the get-go. I wanted to create this sort of immersive environment using multiple projectors in the space. And I was interested in the sort of reflective and refractive quality that plexiglass brings to it. And those those things, also led me to sort of think about my relationship with plexiglass and the meaning that plexiglass has taken on during these COVID times, as it's really recognizable now as a material. We've come into contact with it in sort of a different way now as a result of social distancing and needing to have barriers when you're at the grocery store or in medical sorts of situations. So Zane and I worked with plexiglass to design these sets of movable structures that the dancers interact with throughout the course of the piece. And we manipulated those sorts of interactions. So they're dealing with the wall in different ways, sometimes in sort of contradicting ways. Sometimes the barrier is something that the dancer is really struggling with, or sometimes the dancer surrenders to it, or sometimes the dancer collaborates with it to achieve some sort of movement situation. And for me, I was super interested in that because I felt that this image really sort of encapsulates the complexity that one goes through, as a process when dealing with conflict and trying to work towards some sort of resolution. The role of the wall, I think, has evolved throughout the course of my collaboration with the artist. So maybe, Hanok, you want to talk a little bit about that experience as a dancer and sort of how the wall has influenced your work as well?
Yeah, the wall sort of represents many things for me. I think we've all had our experiences throughout the pandemic with regard to social distancing and finding new ways to interact with each other and new ways to interact with our environment. And it's an interesting thing for me because it's a new way for me to be, a new way for me to think about intimacy with people, with myself, with thoughts, feelings, experiences, and the plexiglass is something that sort of forces me rather, to think about myself in relation to other people and also myself within an environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's one particular section in the work that both Gabby and Hanok are in where they're mirroring each other, which is like such an intimate act, but they're separated by the plexiglass. So, it means something really significant for me as an individual who hasn't literally been able to like make contact with people that I normally would, and have to see people through barriers. But then I think it's a whole different thing, right, when that object becomes part of your work and you have to figure out how to integrate it into your work to get it.
Actually, real quick too, if I may add, the plexiglass also represents technology for me, because throughout the pandemic we've had to communicate with each other through the use of technology, and there was this separation in that sense that we had to interact or meet people on Zoom calls or Skype meetings and stuff like that. So the plexiglass also represents, for me, it represents, the separation that technology creates.
Yeah, it's interesting, like the screen of the TV or the screen of the phone.
It makes me think like, I know this is kind of silly, but like it makes me think of an iPhone, iPhone screen, you know?
Yeah. Did you want to add anything about that, Gabby?
I mean, I spoke about it very well.
Yeah.
I think just the wall for me, well, physically it changed my choreography. I had to figure out, okay, how can I, because in the studio I'm not really touching things, I'm just moving with the air, but this is the first time where I'm using an object as part of my dancing, so that was different. But then emotionally it took me to a place of like intimacy and also isolation. During my solo, that's where I get into that isolating state of mind. So it gives me like flashbacks of those feelings that I had during the pandemic. And then when I'm with Henok, I'm also thinking about the intimacy that I've lost. Not just like, during the pandemic and the emotions that I feel are connected to different areas of my life. So it just brings that back. I don't know if that was clear, but...
No, it is totally.
It definitely forces us to think about like what we lose in the sense that when we have the plexiglass barrier, or any barrier for that fact, for like having that barrier there reminds me of how important it was for me to have some sort of physical relationship with people when I'm meeting with them. So it's harder for me to, as silly as this sounds, but it's harder for me to remember names if I'm meeting people through, Zoom and stuff. And
oh my gosh, teaching through Zoom.
Exactly. Teaching movement through Zoom it's close to impossible because there's just so much information that's derived from in-person interactions.
This is also reminding me of something of like the different way of comforting people. Like I miss being able to just be there and like physically touch someone, when they're in need. And now it forces me to like verbalize things that I'm not used to expressing with words. I'm more used to expressing with my body. So that just reminded me of that.
Yeah, you've had to also become, in ways, like more dexterous, or like you've had to develop other muscles. Yeah, interesting stuff.
Jessie, what do the projected images represent? What is their role in the work besides acting as an aesthetic backdrop for the dance?
Yeah, so the images really belong to the performers. It was part of our creative process that each of us sort of go back into our archive of personal images that we've collected, most of us through our phones, pictures or videos, and to seek out images that for us had some sort of connection to the idea of separation. And, we started talking about the pandemic, but then, for some it sort of stretched beyond the pandemic. And I think, it was just an opportunity for each of us to get really personal. And once we all had brought forward the images that we felt comfortable sharing, I gathered them all and created a 6-channel, so 6 different streams, film out of them. And that 6-channel film is being projected by 6 different projectors throughout the course of the work. So each projector sort of tells a different story, and we've choreographed those projections in such a way that the images that are playing in the space during a certain scene have a special relationship to the performer, because those images actually are the performer's images. So in a way, the dancers are sort of performing and moving in the the worlds of their memories?
Yeah, it was interesting for me because I felt like I was going down memory lane, looking at all the images and videos that I've gathered throughout the years. And it was interesting for me because I derived meaning in that I realized that I had something back then that I don't really have now. And that meaning, the meaning that I managed to derive from it was the fact that I had a lot more freedom. And there was a lot of freedom in movement, being able to travel, being able to go on walks, feeling the images that I used had a feeling of aliveness and movement, and for me that was very, very much related to freedom.
So would you say then in your choices, or maybe you sort of chose these images intuitively, I don't know, but actually was your process of choosing the images, would you say that was more intuitive, or would you say like, I wanted to convey this thing that I feel like I've lost, which is freedom?
It was, no, I didn't go into it with the mindset that I would go in. I didn't go into it with the mindset that I wanted to pick images that represented freedom, but it was more intuitive at first. I just picked moving images that spoke to me, and the ones that spoke to me just so happened to have, or at least give me the sense of freedom, or gave me the sense of movement, or a different lifetime.
Yeah, I did the same thing. I was just going through my phone, and the ones that spoke to me, I chose. And then once I started to see that I had like a pattern, then I was like, okay, it's clear that like traveling, for example, I never realized how much I traveled. Not necessarily like around the world, but just like different places within like Massachusetts, for example. And so I was like, I don't know, it made me realize also, how do I say it? I feel like I'm just saying the same thing as you, just that I didn't realize how much I had back then. And
What's interesting though, and this is something that I've been thinking about, these images conjures up a lot of feelings and thoughts about these past experiences. And I don't necessarily feel like I've lost anything, but if anything, I feel as though those experiences speak to me because of how different life was back then. But now I feel like I could go into those experiences, or experiences similar to the ones that I captured on video, with a new light, with a new outlook, with more appreciation for things that were.
I wanted to ask you to remind me of, you shared with me this really beautiful image about the directionality of future and past that you were experiencing while you were doing the work. I was wondering if you could talk more about that.
Yeah, for sure. It's not my idea, but throughout this process of gathering the images from my archive, I realized that we are, or at least I'm only able to look backwards into the past. So I'm moving through time backwards, if that makes sense. I'm more moving forward through time backwards. Mm-hmm. I can't see the future, but I can certainly see the past. Mm-hmm. And there's also that, that aspect of looking back into the past and not really actually, seeing things or remembering things as they really were, because I don't think we can necessarily do that. But there was an interesting experience for me in that I just felt like there was, a lot of uncertainty with what's coming next. But I can certainly look back, no problem.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, because there's another aspect of this working with this concept of memory that for me has felt super important, particularly when trying to reconcile now with this idea of reunification in Germany, and especially at the beginning of the project, trying to figure out how to reconcile now with then and us with them and who and what and how. But something that felt really important to just register for myself was the fallibility of memory, how it's not reliable. So yeah, the sort of what the relevance of sort of trying to go back anyway, what reunify, bring together. There's something about the fallibility of memory and the notion of unity in the first place.
I actually think that is represented well in the piece, in that the projected images are kind of refracting off the walls. Yeah. We're not looking at the images in a way that's clear. We're seeing these images projected onto surfaces that aren't flat. So it's I think that for me that's a great representation of looking back at memories or reliving memories, because it's not exactly the way it was before.
Yeah.
But in looking at it in the present, we're looking at it through a new lens or a new situation.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I have the sort of the privilege of being able to step back and watch the piece unfold a lot, through the creation process. So I'm constantly aware of seeing these images distorted by the space, the distance between me and the image, or the distance of the projector, whether it's close to the surface or far away from the surface, the dancers' bodies, then the walls themselves, which are, the materiality of the plexi and the refraction and also the reflection, and the sort of density and the textures of the images themselves, also in, dialogue with the environment at the Goethe-Institut, the molding, and creating these multiple layers of reality all sort of unfolding in time and space is super dense and enjoyable for me to watch anyway.
All right, final question. How did the meaning of the work change during the process of creating it?
So as I mentioned or alluded to earlier, I was really challenged by this commission in the beginning. I wasn't so much concerned about the dance component or the technical elements. I was pretty clear in the vision that I had for how I wanted to work with the space, knowing the building. And I feel that my creative process with you all at the Boston Dance Theater Artists is developed enough that it feels pretty solid. We've had a core group of collaborators for quite a while now. But so it wasn't really any of those elements that I was concerned about. I just really, for the first 3 months after being given this commission, I was really stuck in that initial prompt about reunification. I kept feeling like it wasn't the right moment to be making a piece about coming back together again. We're, especially at that time and now as well, we're still sort of in the thick of this global pandemic, and our world is full of violence and racial injustice. We're in the middle of a climate crisis. Our country is more polarized politically now than ever. So I was really just sort of like banging up against this concept for a long time. It felt like I couldn't find a way into it. And then about a month ago, everything completely changed for me. My father unexpectedly passed away, and it was like a paradigm shift for me. I've been wading through the sea of an intense personal grief ever since. And during that time, I found the work of David Kessler, who a lot of people know him. He's a very respected grief specialist here in the US. And David's work has sort of opened me up to the realization that I've been in grief actually for a really long time. I came to understand that grief has many flavors, and that there's not a person who's alive today who hasn't experienced loss in some form or another, whether it's a loss, like mine of a loved one, and my grandmother passed 6 months before, so it's been quite a bit of loss for me and my family in that way. But loss can also take the form of losing a job, or losing routine, or not being able to go to school. So I think interacting with David's work sort of helped me understand that I, like so many others, have been stuck in grief without realizing it, because I didn't know that it was grief. I didn't know that I needed also to give it a name. So this work is about that. It's about my realization that coming back together again needs to happen after healing, on an individual level, also on a collective level. We need people to witness our grief, acknowledging the pain of that, and and that emotions need to move. And so I think it's, for me, the meaning is not in what the work is about. I'm still discovering the meaning in the same way that I'm making and creating meaning following the loss of my father. His life had a meaning. This work has a meaning. And I think that what's really important to me about it is the meaning that we find in making it, and the meaning that you can find in witnessing it.
Yeah, I don't know enough about grief to even feel comfortable, following up.
But that's
your comments.
That's my point too, is like, wow. I mean, did you know that you can grieve? You can have grief after you lose your job? Or it's grief after a breakup?
I'm aware that that's an emotion or an experience that anyone can experience. I never really thought about it though, It's like one of those things where I'm sure I've experienced grief. I'm sure I've experienced traumatic, experiences or events that I don't readily think of it as a traumatic experience, or an experience where I'm grieving. But because of this pandemic, because of this whole experience of being isolated and being forced to sit in one spot, virtually sit in one spot, it's more complicated than that. But I think that this pandemic has highlighted a lot of those things that have been underneath the surface, such as grief and stuff like that. Another thing that comes to mind for me is grieving the life that we had before.
Exactly.
Grieving the social interactions that we had before, and how important that, how important that has been in our, overall mental health. Having the ability to just, hang out with friends or hang out with your family.
I think it's interesting how I've always sort of thought, I comment on my feelings a lot rather than just feeling them. Meaning, like, oh, I'm sad, but I shouldn't be sad because someone else has a situation that's worse than mine. Which kind of, again, that like suppresses the feelings rather than allowing me to just move through them. That's what has made me feel the most sort of excited about this work, is like, we're not directly sitting down going, this is my grief, this is what I've lost, witness me doing that. But like, we're finding ways of bringing those very personal moments into shared space and time in like an artistic and creative sense, even if we aren't like directly commenting on each other's stories.
Yeah, it's like you're allowing us, or I don't know if allowing is the right word, but you're reminding us or letting us feel these things rather than suppressing them.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I can say.
I think, it's also something that comes to mind is in relation to what you were just, in relation to your comment, I wonder if, this topic or this work could help highlight grief in other people's lives. Or what else, it makes me wonder what else is conjured up in witnessing.
You mean them witnessing, like audience or people outside witnessing this?
Yeah.
I'm going to be super curious about that, to hear what people see and feel.